Well, good afternoon, morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world today. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our Big Book 12 workshop on Zoom. This call is being recorded. Please join me on a request for divine intervention. We're asking the Spirit to open our mind and open our heart, especially in this discussion that we're going to have today. There's lots of prejudice and knowledge and experience that actually blocks us from really hearing about step 11 meditation. So have as your intention holding an open mind and an open heart and asking for help in that opening. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you. For an open mind and a new experience of myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. Please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So we've come a long journey. I use the metaphor of the rocket. I like to give a context, as you know, so that we can take a look back over our shoulder as to where we've been, get a real kind of concrete picture as to where we are and where we're going. Bill uses that metaphor on page 25 in the big book, rocketed into the fourth dimension. So we began this process by getting into the rocket. An admission in step one and an experience that we need help. That we need help of a power other than our own. Some people call it God, some people call it higher power. Some people call it energy and force. At this point in step one, all we're doing is taking a look at our hopelessness and helplessness, the ineffectiveness of our efforts at reducing our suffering and having the life that we want. But in terms of the action and in terms of living our life in reality, even though we're abstinent, without a transformation and the spiritual awakening, we will only experience restless, irritable, and discontent. This first stage of the rocket launch is to establish that foundation, a deep experience of no choice. And then we're immediately brought to an invitation for a choice. Step two. Is there a power? And what is that power? For me, what do I need? What do I want? A decision. Not a decision about our addiction and not a decision about our unmanageability. We're clear. We can't make an effective decision in those areas. From our experience, we're clear. But Bill asks us because he believes, as we believe, that we have free will. Not free with regard to our addiction, not free with regard to our life, but free with regard to God or no God. And that's the question he asks us on page 53. He asks us to make a faith choice. God is. There is a power other than, and then in step 3, another faith choice with a little more hope in it, that power will deliver us from our powerlessness. That power in me is available for a relationship with me. Step 3 is that turning to establish that relationship, believing that can be done, that this power cares. We spent several weeks and months even on that first stage of the rocket launch. It's that important. And then we entered into the second stage, which is to take a look at the obstacles to that relationship, to that power deep inside of ourselves, doing inventory, talking about it with somebody else, seeing the implications of it in terms of character defects, and realizing one more time in this second stage that we're powerless. Oh my God, I can see it. With help, I can see it. I couldn't see it on my own, and I prayed in the 4th step about resentment and fear and dishonesty and sex and secrets. And I prayed in the 5th step because I want to reveal everything, but I'm reluctant to, and therefore I need help. And I look at my character defects and I see that I want to change and that I'm kind of not too willing to change. And therefore I pray for the willingness. And it's wonderful. And I've made the point, but it's wonderful to remind each of us that the 7th step prayer begins with my Creator. It couldn't be more perfect. I'm a mess. And I need to be restructured. I need to be recreated. The 3rd step doesn't have an amen because it's a prayer at the beginning of stage 2. The 7th step has a prayer because it's the end of the stage 2 development. I've identified and effectively removed and had removed. Here, the combination of willingness and grace. The obstacles in me to a relationship with me and a relationship with the power that is in me that is not me, but available to me. And I move on to the 3rd stage. Identifying the obstacles in me in terms of my relationship and the impact of that dysfunctional behavior on other people. Change my behavior, amend. And to repair the damage, amend. And Bill said very quickly at the end of the instructions on step 9, but before we've even begun to do step 9, we commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. Steps 10, 11, and 12 is the way of living. He says we've entered the world of the Spirit. Fabulous. Such an organic, integrated process. The first 9 steps, the program of recovery, the program that builds a spiritual shield that protects us because of a relationship with power from our powerlessness with regard to our mind. We are no longer vulnerable to the obsession. These are my terms. Those aren't terms in the big book, but we looked at deeply step 10. Pages 84 and 85 in the big book. We've entered the world of the Spirit, and we have been placed in a position of neutrality. What that means is we have recovered. We've been given the gift of abstinence when we finish the 9th step. It's not that clear in the big book. Bill said we've commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past, meaning as we begin to do our 9th step. And then in the middle of the 9th step, he says you might experience the promises, but he doesn't promise that. He just says you might. But in step 10, he says, you will be placed in a position of neutrality. There's the final promise of the first 9 steps, the gift of freedom from the first half of the first step. And then pay attention to the words. He says, we're not cured. What does he mean by that? He just confirmed, and I just discussed, that we have recovered. Look at the title page in the big book, the title page, that first page with just a little bit of writing, Alcoholics Anonymous, how thousands of people have recovered. That's the term it's used, and it's the term that's consistently used throughout the book, past tense. This is not a promise of recovery. This is not a promise of recovering. This is a promise, a gift of abstinence. We can't gain it on our own power, and we can't lose it on our own power. We looked at some of that when we looked at step 4 at the end of chapter 4. Step 2 at the end of chapter 4. He could not drink even if he would. Awkward language. But it means we've lost the power of choice. We're being given the gift of abstinence. But we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve based on the practice, my term's not in the big book, based on the practice, the daily application of steps 10, 11, and 12. And step 10 is very simple. It's a spot check inventory. The 12 and 12 confirms and clarifies the use of step 10. A spot check inventory on the spot, not at night, not in writing, immediately when I'm disturbed. I bring to bear those 4 suggestions on page 84. To pray because we're powerless, to talk because we're human, to make an amend because we're really human. And when we're disturbed, we disturb others, and to turn our thoughts to helping somebody else. The ultimate antidote to self-centeredness is other-centeredness. Start by thinking about somebody else, and you won't be thinking about yourself. And eventually you'll begin to take actions on behalf of somebody else, and the cycle is complete. The turning has been accomplished. I am willing to turn, and I'm willing to take the actions to turn. And down the road, when I look back over my shoulder, what I see is that I was turned. I was willing to turn. The reality is, I couldn't turn on my own power, but I was turned by a power other than myself. The only explanation that I have. And step 11 is really the critical step. And probably if I were to be totally honest with myself and you, it's my most favorite step. It's the step I intentionally approach every day, very thoughtfully. It's the step that I read books on. It's the step that I talk to people about. It's the step that I go to workshops and retreats for, to expand my experience, to expand the techniques, to expand the practice. My own spiritual director, and I have one. I have a sponsor, I have a step guide, I have a therapist, and I have a spiritual director. I don't use all 4 of them. They're all different people, all of the time. In fact, the only person I'm actually really using right now is a spiritual director, and he's not in a 12-step program. I have a monthly meeting with the sponsor, but quite frankly, by my standards, it's fairly superficial. I've been sober since 1984, and I have a very vital spiritual program, and I have a very consistent practice of meditation. That wasn't always true. Step 11 says sought. Right there, it signals the activity, the commitment. We're seekers. What are we seeking? We're seeking power. Comes right after step 1. We're seeking power. It comes right after and assumes steps 2 and 3, that there is a power and that we can have a relationship with power, and that we now have a relationship with power to empower us. That's the whole point of step 11. Again, Bill gives us inventory as the first instruction at night, what we do at night when we retire. It's not as focused on the liabilities as step 4 is and as step 10 is. Although it does have us do a review of our day, it also has a review of our day in terms of what we contribute and what we plan on contributing tomorrow, or what we have to clean up tomorrow. It's not in writing, it's a meditation. It is done. The man who took me through the steps the very first time in 1988, I was 4 years sober. I had not changed, because I didn't know about the big book as a textbook, and I didn't know the steps had specific instructions, so I had never understood it or applied them personally or effectively. He said, read pages 85 to 88. This is the instruction that we gave you in the assignment from the assignment set. Read the pages 85 to 88 and highlight it. And read it a second time. And outline it. It outlines very nicely, like I began to talk about. What do we do at night? What we do in the morning? And what do we do all day long? That's the 3 sections of the step 11 instructions in the big book. I studied to be a Catholic priest for 7 years in a monastery. 7 years of silence with teachers, and lots of time for meditation, and lots of books and retreats on meditation. And when I left in 1964, I hung up my black robe. In 1964, I left, I hung up my black robe, and I didn't meditate again for another 25 years. What's that? That's because it had come from the outside to me, like my robe. I was a monk when I wore my robe. I meditated when I wore my robe. When I took off my robe, I'm not a monk and I don't meditate, because I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't have any value experience with it. But in 1988, this man, I'm 4 years sober, and he's not trained, but he understood and is a mechanic with the big book. He said, outline it and look up the word meditation in the dictionary. Yeah, he asked me, a former monk, to look up the word meditation in a dictionary. I did. I was startled, because this is 1988. I'm a child of the 60s. Buddhism and the monks from Tibet and India and China and the East had all come over writing books and talking about meditation. That was the word they used. But they used the words emptiness and silence and distance from the mind and no mind. And that's what I thought it was, until I read the dictionary. And my dictionary says directed thinking, the use of the mind to think, the use of the mind to reflect, the use of the mind to come to some conclusions after a discernment of items and issues. It sounds pretty active. Well, that's now my current understanding and practice of meditation, a very active process of the mind. I'm engaged in my mind. Bill says upon awakening in the big book, upon awakening, we ask God to direct our thinking. So he's asking us to pray. That's a code. We ask God to direct our thinking. This man went a step further because he understood the instructions in the book, and he explained to me, Herb, that's a prayer, and it's very short. God, please direct my thinking. He says, but here's not in the book, and here's what his interpretation was. Then I begin thinking, listening to my thinking, trusting that my thinking is the answer to my prayer. Well, that's exactly what Bill was suggesting in the book. He has two actions. We ask God to direct our thinking. God, please direct my thinking. Then he says, we begin thinking about our day. We consider our plans for the day. Bill is not redundant in his instructions. So my interpretation, although it's not clarified in the big book, my interpretation is that those are two different instructions. Think about the 24 hours a day. This is my interpretation, and this is how I do it. What's my plan for the day? What are the actions that I'm going to do today? I do a radar sweep of my day, basically in my imagination, reviewing my day planner. I keep a very specific day planner because of the variety of activities that I'm involved in. And I just, in my mind, I just scan. I don't look at sometimes I look at my day planner if it's more complicated, but mostly I just scan it and say, is there anything in my activities that is contrary to my understanding of spiritual principles? And unfortunately, today the answer is uniformly no. But the second question, consider your plans for the day. If the first question was about my activity, what am I going to do? I've decided that the second instruction is, who am I going to be today? And this is how it works. If in my inventory, either step 10 or the evening review, or now in the morning, I'm aware that yesterday I was kind, then I'm inclined to embrace kindness as the antidote for the character defect du jour. Because although I operate my activity based on spiritual principles more often than not, I still am a human being and I have human reactions. I'm never going to be perfect. I don't actually have a desire to be perfect. I want to be an optimal and healthy human being. I recognize, though, that part of my personality is insensitivity. Was I unkind and insensitive yesterday? Oh, today I will try to be kind. I will focus. I will intentionally incorporate sensitivity and kindness into my day. Or yesterday I was impatient. Today I will try to be more patient and tolerant. Or yesterday I was really scattered and distracted and out of the container. And today, okay, I'm going to really try to be mindful today. So the intention is acts contrary to what I didn't appreciate about myself yesterday, and intentionally trying to improve. Bill Wilson's training was in the Oxford group. The Oxford group was the predecessor group to Alcoholics Anonymous, started by a Lutheran and then managed by the Episcopalians. When Bill met them, Sam Shoemaker was in charge, an Episcopalian bishop, I believe. And they did meditation. They prayed for an open mind and open heart, for guidance. And then they read the Bible for the guidance that they had prayed for. Then they thought about what they had read. That was their meditation, thinking about what they had read and listening to their thinking, listening to their heart, listening to their instincts, listening to their intuitions, listening to their inspirations. All words that are describing the various ways that we learn. Perhaps intuition from the head, inspiration from the heart, instinct from the gut. Just an artificial way of looking at it from my standpoint. The point, though, is, and you've heard it said about listening to the wee small voice. I've heard that so many times, I've read it so many times that I've accepted that that's the translation from the original Hebrew scripture. About a month ago, I challenged it. I said, I've never seen the original wording and the translation from the Aramaic. I don't read Aramaic, but I can look at the translation in a legitimately translated scripture. And you know what the words are? They're not wee small voice. It's the tiny whispering sound. That's cool. The tiny whispering sound. It's not a voice. It's not a words. It's an awareness. I never heard God speak audibly ever once in the monastery or ever since. Even when I was using drugs and drinking alcohol, I never heard audible. But I have heard the tiny whispering sound, and I hear it more clearly and more accurately and more effectively as I practice the meditation and the listening skills. The Oxford group used meditation for guidance. In fact, they wrote it down and they shared it with one another. That was part of their practice. Bill was trained in that. Dr. Bob and his wife Ann were trained in that. Ann, of course, Ann had a much better grasp on it, and she trained Bill and Bob when Bill was in their house from June of 1935 to I think August or September of 35. For 3 months, Bill lived there and on a daily morning basis and would hold the meditation practice and basically instruct and teach Bill and Bob how to meditate. That's the experience Bill writes about in the big book. My own spiritual director said all spiritual people, all people on a spiritual path, all people who want to be spiritual have a spiritual path. And they practice their teaching. They practice their practice. And they're faithful to their practice. And when they're faithful to their practice is faithful to them. It's a mantra with you. What he's saying is, as we think and as we aspire, we translate into action. In fact, he said, I'm responsible for the effort and the results are none of my business. What a relief that was. After a year of practice in 1988, I got bored with it. And what he said was, this is not a task, Herb. It's a process. This isn't an event, Herb. This is an experience. There's only 2 mistakes that you can make in meditation. There's only 2 mistakes. Not show up and leave early. Whether you sit for 20 minutes or an hour, or you sit for 1 minute, if that's your commitment, and that's what I suggest to people, they sit for 1 minute, not to read, not to pray, not to write, not to make grocery lists, not to find peace. 1 minute of intentional consciousness, 1 minute of listening deeply to the tiny whispering sound. 1 minute. Without any other intention or attention. Intent is the direction of my will. Attention is the direction of my and focus of my mind. With that singleness of focus, listening to the tiny whispering sound for guidance. People who have followed that direction, I suggest they do 1 minute a day for 30 days consecutively. If they miss a day, they need to start counting again. It might take 90 days to get 30 or 180 days to get 30. Meanwhile, you're practicing it. It's not a failure. It's just learning a new habit, like riding a bicycle, going to the gym, learning how to practice the piano. We get better if we have talent and a good coach and we practice. It's inevitable. We will get better at being conscious. And isn't that what the step says? Lots of people do meditation to improve their health. Lots of people do meditation to improve their harmony and contentment. Lots of people do meditation to improve their social relationships or financial conditions. It will work. The evidence is conclusive from statistically relevant studies. You will improve your biology, you will improve your psychology, you will improve your sociology. But that's not step 11. There's only one reason to do step 11, and it's in the step itself. When I sit, the first thing I do is I say the set-aside prayer. The second thing I do is I repeat step 11 verbatim. Sought, that's what I'm sitting here to do today, to be quite active in seeking guidance. Sought through prayer and meditation. Oh, those are the two tools that I'm going to use. You've heard it in the meetings. It sounds simplistic, and quite frankly, it's deep wisdom. Prayer is when I'm talking to God, and meditation is when I'm listening to God. I'm not listening with my ears, I'm listening with my soul. I'm listening with my very being to every sound, tiny and whispering, as a potential source of guidance, sought through prayer and meditation. Now, here's the vision statement. Here's the mission. It's so simple and it's right there. To improve my conscious contact with God. That's step 11. If you're doing quiet time, or you're doing any type of prayer and meditation and whatever else with any other motive, great. It probably will be very useful. It's just not step 11. Step 11 has only one purpose, only one mission: to improve my conscious contact with God. And then, of course, Bill recognizes how we're structured, that as human beings, the two things that make us human are that we have a mind and that we have a will. It's a model I've used since step 1. You should be quite used to that now. The 3 parts of the human structure. I have a body. That doesn't distinguish me from a rock or a carrot or a dog. What distinguishes me from all of those other beings is that I have a mind that reflects and self-reflects, and that I have a will that makes voluntary, free, completely free decisions. God or no God. And Bill ends step 11 by saying, praying for the knowledge of God's will. I need to know better. But Bill and the Big Book recognizes that all of us have known better, but we weren't able to do better. So the last part of step 11 recognizes the most important part, praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to do it. I need knowledge for my head and I need power for my feet. And that's the point of step 11, a practice of empowerment. I sit in the presence of power, praying for osmosis, to be absorbed by and to be absorbed in this power so that I will be empowered and given guidance. He said extremely intuitively, he didn't much about the 12-step program back in 1989 when I was having this conversation with him, but with a little explanation of my experience with the 12-step journey, he got it. He said, Herb, you're as powerless over your spiritual life as you are over alcohol having no power at all. You are as powerless over your meditation practice as you are over alcohol having no power at all. Sit in the presence of power, humbled by your powerlessness. Your responsibility is the effort, and the results are none of your business. What a relief that was for me. All of the burden of becoming spiritual, all of the onerous task of becoming a good meditator were just dropped like a concrete overcoat off of my shoulders. And I haven't had a problem with showing up and doing my practice every day for the last 32 years. I have about a 30-minute practice now in the morning, probably a 10 to 20-minute practice at night. I do sit twice a day. That's my goal. I'm much better in the morning than I am at night. When I was leaving his office, he says, "Oh, by the way, Herb, if you want to know if your meditation practice is effective, after 3 months of consistent daily practice, ask your wife how you're treating her. Pay attention to how you're driving on the freeway. Pay attention to how you treat retail people in the stores or in the airline. You will become a nicer person. You will become a more considerate person. You will become a more sensitive person. You will become a person who organically really wants to help people," which of course has been my experience. Not quickly, like the dimmer switch model I've used all year long. It's not a light switch. Appendix 2 confirms a spiritual experience is a light switch, but most of us will have a dimmer switch, that educational variety that goes up a notch at a time. Step 10 confirmed that that dimmer switch can go down a notch at a time and the darkness can descend because we're not cured of our unmanageability. We're not cured of our spiritual malady. We're not cured of our selfishness and self-centeredness. But if we stay gently pressed up against it, no violence here, gently pressed up against it, that dimmer switch will go up a notch at a time, and there'll be more light. And then there'll be more light. And then there'll be more light. And as you know, and we've said it all year long, with more light, you see more. You're able to take more effective actions. You're able to take more helpful decisions. And my life flourishes as the result of all of this work, not just of the meditation, but the meditation keeps the light very bright. In the 12 and 12, Bill gives us the value proposition. He says, in the same way, my body needs air, water, sunshine, and food for nourishment and sustenance. My soul and spirit needs prayer and meditation. So what you really have to do is ask yourself, do I believe that? I certainly believe that air, water, sunshine, and food are a value to me sustaining my daily life, physical, emotional, mental. But do I really believe that prayer and meditation are as critical in sustaining and nourishing my spiritual life? If you're doing it, you do believe that. If you're not doing it, you don't believe it. And I hear the pushback. Oh, I do, I just don't have time. Well, that's just a delusion. If you actually believe it, you will behave as you believe. That's the veil-rending experience that we had with step 2. What is it that you actually believe, and how do you behave in light of what you believe you believe? You remember that? It was a transformational question. Are you powerless? Do you really believe that? Do you need power other than your own? Do you really believe that? Is meditation a technology that will give you power? Do you really believe that? There's so many questions. There's so many assumptions. Of course, steps 2 and 3 are the key assumptions to step 11. What is it that you believe about power? What is it that you believe about your relationship with power? Not that you know or have any certitude about it. Not that you feel or have any emotion about it. Those are not the issues. They're not relevant because this is a faith journey, a decision without evidence. But fortunately, when we make that decision, the evidence appears and hope begins to grow. And as, in fact, we have an experience of confirmation from our actions and the outcomes and the universe's reinforcement and confirmation, our practice strengthens. One of the images I like, the metaphor, is a golf cart. I don't golf, but I observe what they do. They contain two people, usually. They go out on a golf course and start at hole one. And they carry the golfers through 18 holes through the end of their game. It might take all day long. That's the purpose and service rendered by the golf cart. What happens with the golf cart at the end of the day? It goes into a shed and cables are put onto the batteries because it's battery run. And the batteries are empowered and filled up with power so that it can be of service the next day to take the golfers from tee to tee to tee to tee. When I sit in the morning, if I'm having any agitation, distraction, or lack of attention, I create that image for myself. I'm sitting there putting on the God cables to be empowered today. Number one, to know what I'm invited to do. And number two, to given me the power to be able to do it. The Big Book is the most effective instruction manual I have ever seen in the area of step 11. It's 2.5 pages. It's the most effective methodology for meditation. It doesn't stand alone. The 12 and 12 supports and expands Bill's experience. There are other books, of course, and other trainings and other teachers that will help you expand and deepen and practice your practice. But it's not about learning, it's about doing. And we actually learn from the doing. And we're led along the path to expand our practice of seeking, sought through prayer and meditation, to improve our conscious contact. Remember what Bill said in his own story on page 14. I've quoted it often in many different contexts, but it's a wonderful summary of the spiritual journey. Simple, but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light. Thank you very much for your participation today in our workshop. Let's close with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody.